give a little minute to get going.
There we go. Okay.
Let me take a look. Perfect, and I see your presentation.
Fantastic. Shall I go?
You should start, yes.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Nash. I'm a Senior Curator of Archaeology at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And this is Science Division Live, a new program by the Denver Museum of Nature and Science to bring you virtual content from curators, from collections managers, from conservators and registrars and collections assistants and so on, talking about the work that's been going on behind the scenes at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science for almost 120 years. This is the kind of presentation that we oftentimes will do in evening lectures, in classroom lectures, in short presentations on the floor of the museum. But we're using the current pandemic situation to bring some of this content to you several times a week. We'll do it Monday, we'll do it Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Different content, really cool topics from great scientists and so on. And what I want to do with you today is share with you a story of a decade-long effort to repatriate some artifacts to the 9 tribes of the Mijikenda in Kenya. And before I go into that story, I want to take 30 seconds to a minute for you to do an exercise. Now, we've all been stuck at home, stay at home for a couple of months. And if you're like me, you spent some time working on projects that were on your to-do list for a really long time and may have included clearing out a storage locker or closet in your home. And one of the things that I did was cleared out a closet that had camping gear, and it had photographs from my childhood and family correspondence and so on. What I want you to do for the next 30 seconds or so is think about the single most important object in your house. It could be a chalice. It could be a crucifix. It could be a Torah. It could be something that's not religious, but is just simply the most cherished object in your house. Think about what that object is for a couple of seconds, and I'll come back to you. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time. You've got that object in mind. You may have that object in your hands. Now I want you to envision an art collector from a different continent coming to your home, coming to your neighborhood, and taking that object away from you, and then selling it to a person up this long chain of possession, going from the person that took it from you all the way up to an art dealer in some cosmopolitan city halfway around the world. And then I want you to think about somebody taking that object and buying it as a piece of art and putting it up on their shelf, or donating it to a museum and putting it in their storage, in their research collection, so that people can research them at some point in the future. How would you feel about that? Would it make you happy? Would it make you sad? Would it affect your ability to lead your life the way that you want to lead your life? And as a scientist, I can look at cause and effect relationships and say, oh, that, taking that object it's not going to change anything functionally or something like that. It's not going to change somebody's ability to put food on the table. But human beings are much more complex than that. And our ability to do things under stress, under duress, is magnificent. We can do wonderful things when stressed. But at the same time, the flip side of that is that when things that mean something to us in our hearts and in our souls are taken from us, it can also do damage to us, to our families, and to our societies. So the story I want to share with you today is the museum's decade-long effort to repatriate some grave posts that were taken from the Mijikenda tribes in Kenya in the 1970s and 1980s. So let me go to the PowerPoint here. All right. I worked on all of this technology, folks, and I apologize. I'm an archaeologist. I'm not used to this high-tech stuff. Got the PowerPoint, but now I can't do the page down thing on it and get to the next slide. So we're going to do this the old, oh wait, there it is. No. We're going to do this the old-fashioned way, and I'm going to tell you about these things. So if you look at the photograph on the lower right, you'll see me with the red scarf on the left of the picture. Behind me, the man with the sunglasses that are on his shirt, that are down by the buttons of his shirt, that's Dr. Jimbi Kitana, who belongs to the Mijikenda tribes in coastal Kenya. But he also works for the National Museums of Kenya. And he's not an anthropologist, but he's an ecologist and a cultural heritage specialist there. But he is really the key conduit for getting these African grave posts returned to the people from whom they were taken. The gentleman in front of me holding on to this Vigango post are the elders of the Giriyama tribe of the Mijikenda, and it was to them that I was handing back the Vigango. Now, the Vigango are interesting. Many of you have relatives who have been buried in cemeteries. They might be in Fairmount Cemetery here in Denver, where people can be cremated and then given a marker stone of some kind, or they can be buried, embalmed, and then buried in a coffin and put down, and then they have a headstone. And the headstones in Western society typically have our name, they have our birth date and our death date, and they may have our religious affiliation as well. But for us, the headstone is really just that. It's a marker, right? If somebody took it away or if somebody broke it, it would be damaged. We would be hurt by that. But the person that the marker is honoring wouldn't be hurt. Their ancestral spirit, for most of us, wouldn't consider that person has been hurt. For the Mijikenda in Kenya, they erect these Vigango, these roughly 3 foot long, 3 foot tall to 6 foot tall wooden posts made out of termite-resistant wood. They carve these in honor of members of the sacred Gohu society when they die. They bury the member of that society, and then they erect these Vigango where that person is buried, near where that person is buried, to honor that special someone. But the Mijikenda believe that the Vigango are the embodiment of that person's spirit. So I should say the singular for the term for this is Kikongo, the plural is Vigango. So an individual Kikongo is considered to be the ancestral spirit of the person who died. That's their physical embodiment of that dead person's soul. So in the 1970s and 1980s, there was an African art dealer in Los Angeles who needed something to jazz up his business. Sales weren't going well. It was times during inflation and all of this in the United States, and he needed something new to jazz up sales, quite frankly. And he learned about Vigango that were erected by the Mijikenda, and he and others like him started paying people to cut down the Vigango from the homesteads where they were erected. And then they took these things to Nairobi or to other big cities, and ultimately they made it onto the international art market, and they ended up in Los Angeles, hundreds of these things. And in an interesting twist of fate, some of the people that got really interested in buying Vigango, either to decorate their homes or to have in their collections or as an investment strategies, were big-time Hollywood actors and producers that you all know. They oftentimes bought these things. They may have taken possession of them, and then they donated them. Sometimes they donated them to museums and universities in order to get a tax write-off. Now, our collection was donated to us by a movie actor, and I'm not going to name this person, but you would all recognize this person's name, and they were donated to us by a producer as well. And as far as we can tell, that actor and that producer never took possession of the 30 Vigango that we had at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. We've talked to their agents, their people, and it doesn't look like they ever took possession, which means that this was all for a tax deduction. They got roughly $150,000 tax deduction 30 years ago. So it's adding insult to injury. The injury is that these Vigango, these ancestral spirits, were stolen from the landscape, from the people to whom they belonged, and then they were just part of a tax scheme, if you will. Anyway, the Denver Museum of Nature and Science accepted a donation of 30 of these in the 1990s and didn't know what these were. But in 2006, 2007, 2008, we set out to do a complete overhaul, a complete inventory of the anthropology collections at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science under the rubric of We want to curate the best understood and most ethically held collection in North America. That means we wanted to understand what we had and why we had it, and we wanted to make sure that we were abiding by all kinds of ethics, everybody's ethics, when keeping these collections. Now, you may have heard that the British Museum and other museums, these big world-class, world-renowned natural history museums, believe that their job is to be encyclopedic, is to have something from everywhere on the planet as an encyclopedia for everybody on the planet. And we're okay with that philosophy as long as it doesn't impugn on somebody's ethics. So come back to the whole notion of what's the most sacred object in your house. If somebody from halfway around the world took it and then put it into their museum without your permission, how would you feel? Even more egregiously, if somebody came into your house and took the embodiment of one of your relatives and put it on display at a museum halfway around the world, or use it for a tax scheme, how would that make you feel? So we decided 12 years ago that we did not want to curate the Vigango that were currently in the Denver Museum of Nature and Science collections, and we started working to repatriate these sculptures, to send them back to the people who first created them. We reached out to people at the university, at various universities, and at the National Museum of Kenya. And as you might imagine, these folks are busy. The institutions typically don't have a lot of money. Our letters oftentimes fell on deaf ears. And so we didn't have a lot of success for the first few years. And then we realized that Denver, Colorado has a sister cities relationship with Nairobi, Kenya. Now, the Sister Cities program is designed to enhance tourism and economic ties between various cities, and you can go online and see what your home city has as a sister city. But for Denver, it's Osaka, Japan, and it's Nairobi and some other cities. And we thought, oh, cool, this is our way to make some progress. So we reached out to our city councilman, Albus Brooks at the time, and then Mayor Michael Hancock, and we got together and said, look, the next time the people from Nairobi come to Denver, let's get together and let's talk about how to repatriate these Vigango. And in 2014, in February of 2014, it was great. We had a signing ceremony at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science with the mayor, our councilman, the acting ambassador from Kenya, and two guys who were city and county of Nairobi government officials. And we held a signing ceremony. We signed a letter pledging to repatriate these Vigango, and they were to go back to the National Museum of Kenya. And at that time, we didn't have any contacts with the Mijikenda tribes themselves down on the coast, but we had decided we didn't have legal title to these Vigango because they were stolen. So it was good enough for us to send them back to the National Museum of Kenya, and then they can work to get them back to the Mijikenda. Everything was great. We created these things, we shipped them off to the airport, and then we found out that the Kenyan Revenue Authority wanted to charge us a $40,000 import tariff. And as I like to joke around, I'm from Chicago originally. I understand bribery, I understand extortion, but let's be reasonable, folks. A couple $1,000s can, grease a palm here and there, if you will. But $40,000, we didn't have $40,000, and we shouldn't have to pay $40,000 to ship these things back to their home country. So the good news is we never sent them. They sat at the Denver International Airport for 3 years. Another institution in California sent theirs back at roughly the same time, and they sat in the airport in Nairobi waiting for somebody to pay that tariff, and now nobody knows where they are. They've disappeared. So bittersweet moment. 2014, we think that we're almost done. We have a signing ceremony with all these officials, and then we're not going to pay this import tariff. So the Vigango sit at a customs cleared storage facility out at Denver International Airport, and we wait. And so for the next 3 years, I sent letters to various people in various offices, not having any success. But then in 2018, I had the chance to go to a Museum Leadership Institute program in Los Angeles, and I looked at the roster of attendees, and lo and behold, one of my fellow students was going to be Dr. Purity Kira, who is in charge of sites and monuments for the National Museums of Kenya. There's the connection, folks. So on the first night of this event, I found Purity and went up to her and explained to her the situation, and we pledged that night in 2018, June of 2018, that we were going to solve this problem. So she went home to Kenya, and then I came back here to Denver, and we worked and worked and worked, and then she finally got a letter from the Kenyan Revenue Authority saying they were going to waive the import tariff on the Vigango. And within, excuse me, within 3 days, the Vigango were on their way home, and they went to the National Museum of Kenya in Nairobi, and they opened up the crates and they looked at them and held a big press conference, and it was great. I mean, everybody was happy at that point. But for me, I've been engaged in a lot of repatriations of Native American human remains to the various tribes, these ancestors, sending them back to the tribes. I've sent back sacred objects and objects of cultural patrimony. That's a fancy term for something like the Liberty Bell, which belongs to everybody. And it's heavy duty work. I'm not going to lie. It's heavy duty work. But something about the Vigango was different for me, and I needed closure. So last fall, I went to Kenya. My family and I went to Kenya, and we went to Nairobi, and then we went to the Fort Jesus Museum in Mombasa. We saw the Vigango right there in the museum near their homeland. And then Jimmy Katana, the guy that's in the photograph on the slide that you can see in the back left, he took us on a couple-day trip to go and meet the Mijikenda themselves. And it was an incredibly powerful series of events, and I went for closure for myself. I went not because I felt like I was something special. We were just trying to do the right thing. But come back to that issue of what's sacred and what's important to you as an individual, and then to the groups to which you belong. Think about what it was like for an institution half a world away, for the Mijikenda to have that institution give back the souls of 30 of their ancestors. It's not a trivial thing to do. And so we went back, and it wasn't for me to apologize to these folks for the transgressions that had happened in the past, but I wanted to share with them the joy at being able to do something that was right by all concerned. So my wife and children and I went over there. We went into a welcoming ceremony in one of the villages where there was singing and dancing. We did the ceremonial handover of one of these Vigango statues, as you can see in the photograph on this title slide. And then the next day I went out with Jimmy to meet with some of the elders. And so we had been at the welcoming ceremony. They still need to develop a ceremony to cleanse these Vigango because they've been out of cultural context for so long. And they're going to create a center for these things somewhere out on the landscape. So I hope to go back and celebrate when that opens. But meeting with the elders, the old men who are in charge, who are in powerful positions in these tribes, was a different matter entirely. And so Jimmy and I walked into a sacred forest where we met these men in the assembly point, and got together and talked. And there was some smiles, and there was some uneasiness, and so emotions were all over the place. But the guy that was on my right, and I'm sorry I've forgotten his name, but he was sitting at my right, and he wasn't real happy. He was the sort of dour one. And, after about 15 minutes of banter and conversation, he looked up and he said, 7 Kikongo were stolen from my homestead over 30 years. Think about that, folks. 7 of his loved ones, of respected people, the embodiment of their souls were stolen from his homestead over 30 years' time. And he wasn't mournful, he wasn't angry, but he had that sort of low-key tone of a man who had been hurt badly and seen his loved ones hurt badly and his society hurt badly by a transgression, by a wrong that he had nothing to do with. And I will never forget that moment because it summed up everything about why this was the right thing for the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, the people of the state of Colorado, to do at this time. Because the Vigango are not art. They are not ethnographic objects to be stored in museums. They are the embodiment of a dead person's soul, and an important dead person's soul. So 12 years effort, a lot of stops and starts, but ultimately we were successful in repatriating these ancestors to the Mijikenda. And everybody in the museum, from the curators, the collections managers, on up to the president, CEO, and the chair of the board of trustees, and all of the trustees, in fact, agreed that this was the right thing to do. And that's an incredibly powerful action and activity to have been part of. So I just wanted to share that with you folks in a time of challenges for all of us, is that being kind, being generous, being compassionate, and being considerate really, really makes a difference, and it can come in many, many different forms. So I'm happy to take questions and comments. I'm going to keep working on this doggone slideshow to see if I can show you these images. But I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'm happy to take questions. I see one of the comments here is that, of course, they wanted a bribe. Indeed, we can talk about what was going on with that. I like to think that many different nations and tax authorities and so on are stressed for money. And when it looks like an institution that has a lot of money is trying to do something that they felt was wrong, perhaps we can we could do the right thing. And yeah, it didn't feel right all the time, but we ultimately didn't pay the bribe or the tariff or whatever we want to call it, and all's well that ends well. So another question came up. What other objects are we returning? Here comes some of the images. I will slow down and go back to them for you. Um, so this is a close-up image of what the Vigango looked like. You can see on the left, it's a 3-foot long pole, about 6 inches wide. The close-up on the right, you can see the anthropomorphic head, the stylized head, and then some tassels made out of sacred cloth of various kinds. Beautiful in their own right. Not everybody's artistic aesthetic, but very much beautiful objects. And you can see why some people would have looked at these and said, oh, they're artwork, but they're more than that. The next slide that we'll see here in just a second is images of some of the Mijikenda elders in showing the Vigango out on the landscape. And you can see that they're just erected here, especially on the left-hand side. They're just erected in enclosures, in gardens, right around the house. And then on the right-hand side are some of the elders with 2 Vigango that were repatriated from another museum. And they're standing in a cage because they're going to put these Vigango into that protective enclosure so that they don't get stolen again. And the 30 Vigango that we have that we repatriated probably I hope won't go into a cage like this, but they're going to go into a sacred center somewhere in the sacred forests where they can be protected more. But it's unclear. These folks don't have a lot of money, so to build a building to protect the Vigango is another matter entirely. But I've offered to do what I can, both personally and professionally, to try and help them create a space that is safe and respectful of the ancestors that these Vigango contain and represent. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but that's what the Mijikenda believe. So some of the other questions, how many likely exist in other museums? There's at least a couple of hundred that have been stolen and that are in other museums that we know of. There's probably more in private collections. Here's a photograph of Albus Brooks on the left, then Mayor Michael Hancock, and then George Sparks, the CEO of the museum, the acting ambassador of Kenya, and then 2 guys from the city and county of Nairobi at the signing ceremony in 2014. When we did this signing ceremony, the New York Times ran a story about this, and then we got phone calls from a couple of owners, one in Aspen, one in Berkeley, California, people who had Vigango that they wanted to try and repatriate with ours. And we ultimately decided we needed to get the DM&S collection back first, and then we would entertain the idea of trying to help others do this. So at least a couple hundred in the United States and probably more elsewhere. What other objects are we working on returning? Not many. We've accommodated much of the repatriation efforts that we wanted to take care of. Much of it occurs through legally mandated relationships with Native American tribes, and it has to do with repatriating ancestors, so human bones, and we don't have any human bone left in the collection at all. We've repatriated the ancestors over the last dozen years as well. Here's 2 photographs of our crates arriving in Nairobi at the National Museum of Kenya. You can see we packed these things safely and well, and they went 2 planes. They went to London first, then changed planes and went to Nairobi, and there they are, our museum colleagues over there unpacking, having a look. And then here, the next one is a close-up shot of the moment of truth for me in many ways, is when we ceremonially handed over the first one of the Vigango to two of the elders there, and you can see the smiles all the way around. It was an incredibly powerful moment that I will never forget. So I think that in the absence of one more slide here, and this is what I was hinting at when I was saying that I don't feel like a terribly special person for doing this. I feel like we did the right thing by any stretch of the imagination as to what is right to do in society. But they wanted to honor us when we went there. So this is a picture of me with some of the National Museum of Kenya employees who helped out with all of the work that was going on down there, translation and some of the work, and the blanket that I'm on, the purple blanket, the stool that I'm sitting on, the wrap that I'm wearing, plus the scarf, were given to us, and we brought them all back to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, where they've been accessioned and will help tell the story going forward. The staff that I'm holding was too important for me. They're like, yeah, you're not taking that. That stays with us. So this was I don't mean to make light of a situation, but it was a joyous occasion, and you respect what folks' interests are and values are and so on. And it was simply a great project to be part of and to put some closure on what was undeniably a bad situation, because the Mijikenda have said for decades that the theft of the Vigango have affected climate, have affected crop yields, have affected the health of animals, have affected the health of human beings. It was a transgression of the highest order, and we believed it simply to be theft. We never had legal possession of those Vigango. And I think, unless there are any other questions coming through, if you have additional questions for me, you can email me at stephen.nash@dmns.org. Look me up online. I'm not the 6'6" Canadian basketball player Steve Nash. I'm Stephen with a PHEN.Nash@dmns.org. I'm happy to engage in conversation with you. I can send you some articles that we've written about this whole episode. And then the rest of the week, Science Division Live, we have Megan Grizzle talking about the Jones Miller bison kill site from northeastern Colorado on Wednesday at noon. Tiffany Nestle will be talking about yuck and the science of taste on Thursday. And then Friday is going to be a surprise. It's still TBD, but we'll find out what we can do to share with you the wonderful, wonderful stories that are coming out of your Denver Museum of Nature and Science. So I thank you so much for your time and attention, and I hope to see you around.